Hi there and welcome to the channel, and to this, the third video in my series on the novels of Henry James. Previous installments dealt with Daisy Miller and most recently Washington Square, and this time it's the turn of The American. First published in book form in 1877, serialized prior to that in the Atlantic Monthly from 1875 to 1876. Now this time I don't need to provide a thumbnail sketch of James's life and literary career because I did that in the previous video. So instead I'll provide some context on The American from James himself. And I'm drawing for this on his excellent book, The Art of the Novel. And these are critical prefaces put together many decades after the composition of the works themselves. And James makes 3 points about The American which are relevant to what follows. Firstly, he notes that due to the serial nature of publication, from one month to the next, he wasn't sure which direction the story would go in, and he just kind of played it by ear. Linked to this is the fact that halfway through, he realized that he had unconsciously produced a romance, and that began to shape the second half of the novel. And lastly, regarding his protagonist, Christopher Newman, through whose eyes we see all of the action of the novel, he says this: "I leave the record to stand or fall by his more or less convincing image," and this final point will be extremely relevant when I come on to my analysis. But before that, I wish to provide you with a summary and offer you a taste of what you'll find within these pages by reading you an indicative quotation. But first, as promised, the story. So The American begins with Christopher Newman, a multi-millionaire, newly arrived in Paris, and he's sitting on a divan in the Louvre, admiring the artworks and also admiring a young, beautiful woman who is copying one of the masterpieces on the walls. He engages her in conversation and says, "I really like your picture. How much would it cost to buy?" And she names an astronomical figure, which he agrees to readily. Her father then comes over and makes his acquaintance with Newman, and they are thrilled at the thought of taking this American mug for a financial ride, and their story weaves throughout the novel. However, on Newman's exit from the Louvre, he runs into an old acquaintance from the home country, Mr. Tristram, who invites him to dinner at his residence, and so he attends a few days later, and there he meets Mrs. Tristram. And during their conversation, Newman lets slip that he wouldn't mind finding a wife, and Mrs. Tristram says, "I know just the woman. She's absolutely perfect." And Newman says, "Wait a moment, I need a first-class wife." And Mrs. Tristram says, "Well, Madame de Saintré is for you. She's a widowed countess of a very noble French family." And so she engineers a meeting between Newman and Madame de Saintré, and would you believe it, they quickly discover feelings for one another. However, her snobby family are dead set against the match, with the exception of Valentin, Madame de Saintré's younger brother, who strikes up a friendship with Newman and agrees to press his suit on his behalf. And in the first half of the novel, everything appears to be going smoothly, despite the family's opposition. The thought of getting their hands on some of Newman's millions makes them overlook his lowly status, and the marriage can proceed. However, after a society occasion where they introduce him to the rest of their aristocratic cronies, they have a change of heart and they cancel the wedding and spirit Madame de Saintré away. And I'm not going to go any further, but that is the turning point, because Newman simply will not back down, and he sets himself to rescue his beloved, and that's just what you'll have to read and find out for yourself in the second half of the story. Okay, now I'm going to read you a little passage to give you a taste. This is the moment where Newman declares his love for Madame de Saintré and asks her to marry him. "Your brother told me that my antecedents and occupations were against me, that your family stands somehow on a higher level than I do. That is an idea which, of course, I don't understand and don't accept. But you don't care anything about that. I can assure you that I am a very solid fellow, and that if I give my mind to it, I can arrange things so that in a very few years I shall not need to waste time in explaining who I am and what I am. You will decide for yourself whether you like me or not. What there is you see before you. I honestly believe I have no hidden vices or nasty tricks. I am kind, kind, kind. Everything that a man can give a woman, I will give you. I have a large fortune, a very large fortune. Someday, if you will allow me, I will go into details. If you want brilliancy, everything in the way of brilliancy that money can give you, you shall have. And as regards anything you may give up, don't take for granted too much that its place cannot be filled. Leave that to me. I'll take care of you. I shall know what you need. Energy and ingenuity can arrange everything. I'm a strong man. There, I have said what I had on my heart. It was better to get it off. I'm very sorry if it's disagreeable to you, but think how much better it is that things should be clear. Don't answer me now if you don't wish it. Think about it. Think about it as slowly as you please. Rather excruciating, I think you'll agree, and nothing like the fine writing one typically associates with Henry James, nothing like the dialogue in Washington Square, which positively sparkles with wit. How then is one to enjoy a novel with the protagonist quite as boneheaded as Christopher Newman? Well, there are, I would suggest, two compensations when reading The American. The first is the wonderful depiction of the unlikely friendship which blooms between Newman and Valentin, Madame de Saintrey's younger brother, who's a very charismatic figure. And these scenes of the two men interacting are some of the best in the novel, and they do help you slowly to warm to Newman because they very much show him in his best light. The second compensation is the page-turning nature of the second half, which is full of features one finds in Gothic fiction. We have deathbed confessions, dark family secrets, assignations taking place at midnight in romantic ruins, and so on. And this page-turning section keeps you guessing right up to the end. So there are some compensations on offer, but I would be remiss in not remarking upon some of this novel's flaws before bidding you farewell. So let's come on to those. The biggest problem with The American, I probably wouldn't even have noticed if I hadn't read some French novels from the 19th century, and that is how weak the depiction of Paris is. At this point in his career at least, Henry James is not very good at writing about the life of a city. The depictions of social occasions are rather unconvincing. So if you want to know what Paris was like during this period, I'd recommend a novel like Maupassant's Bel-Ami, which is very confident in its handling of French society, and The Master, Flaubert with his sentimental education. Yes, the second flaw was Madame de Saintrey. It was very difficult to divine the precise nature of her appeal. We see her only through Newman's eyes, and he is just constantly saying, "You're great, you're beautiful, you're wonderful, you're everything I could ever want." But unfortunately, Madame de Saintrey never really seems to do anything, and so this also detracted somewhat from my enjoyment of this work. However, on balance, still a very readable Henry James novel, and quite different to the other ones I'd read. This one in some ways was more similar to a Dickens novel, as strange as that may sound. So I'm not going to dismiss this one. I'm not going to say you shouldn't read it. If you have the time, if you have the inclination, pick it up and give it a try. There, I've said everything I want to say, and all that remains is for me to bid you farewell in time-honoured fashion. So until the next time, be safe, be strong, nanu nanu.